All right, my analysts in training, welcome. Welcome to the dojo. I will be your instructor for this portion of the course, as well as the rest of the course. And today we're going to talk about the most important part of this entire course. If you take one thing away from this course at all, it doesn't have to be the technical side of this. It doesn't have to be how to analyze malware, but I want to drive one thing home. And that is exactly what you see on the screen right in front of you. Safety always. Not safety first, safety always. What you're about to do is risky by its nature. And that's okay, because if we adhere to some basic principles, we're never going to put our own operating system or our own data and files at risk. And so we really want to mitigate a couple of things here. So the idea is that we're going to have live malware in an environment, a controlled environment that we're going to be able to detonate. Now, the times that you are most vulnerable are going to be when the malware is in transit. Let's say you find a piece of malware. Here's our little bug. He's got the legs. He's got the antenna. He's got the other legs. Now, you have an EXE that is a piece of malware. It is known to cause damage to a system. And we want to make sure that we can get this into an environment where it's not going to do any harm before it gets there. So the idea is that your executable is going to have a .exe extension. Now, one principle of safe malware handling is to add an extension to this that will remove the probability that you, as the analyst, when you're handling this piece of malware, are going to accidentally trigger it without you meaning to. So let's talk about a scenario. So let's say that we have our analyst workstation here, and this is totally fine for malware detonation. So we can put our bugs and little antenna and legs. Maybe he's got some eyes. We can put our bugs in here and we can blow up our malware, and inside of the environment here, it's going to be totally safe. But remember that this is a virtual machine inside of your host operating system. So the risk factor goes up a little bit if you're inside your physical host, transferring malware from some outside location into your physical host and then trying to get it inside the analyst virtual machine. So we can do a couple things to kind of mitigate some of the risks here. So let's say that our file of interest is a .exe, right? Which is the file extension in the Windows operating system for executable. And that means if you double click this or if you use command.exe to run this, the malware is going to run and it's going to do whatever it was designed to do, be that good or bad. And so one of the ideas is that when you find your malware source, let's say you find it on this website that's out here, before it even makes it to your host operating system, what you're going to try to do is handle this so that the .exe extension is defanged or disarmed by adding another extension that does not have executable properties. I like to use MALZ for malwares, so I know what I'm working with, but this could literally be anything. The common malware executable extensions are going to be things like, of course, .exe, some of the scripted malware, .js. We could use something like maybe DLL. So while you are studying how to handle malware properly, you're going to start to realize which ones of these are more dangerous than the others. Some things like TXT, .md, not so dangerous. My point is that before the malware makes it into your environment, what you want to do is append that file extension with another file extension that's going to defang the malware so that by the time it gets into the host operating system, you're not risking inadvertent detonation. Now let's talk about one other thing that we can do to kind of mitigate the risks of inadvertent malware detonation. And that's going to be the way that we handle the malware in a directory structure. We're back in the analyst workstation. What I want you to do is go to the zero handling and safety section of the PMAT labs. And what we're going to look for is the subdirectory there called malwarecalc.exe.mals. Now, I want you to pay attention to exactly how this file is named. Now, inside of this directory, we have a couple different things here. We have this 7-zip file, which is malware.calc.exe.7zip. We have an MD5 sum.txt. We have a password.txt and a SHA-256 sum.txt. Now, I'm naming the malware this. It is a standard convention to me. There is no real one standard naming convention on what to name malware. But whatever makes sense to you, you should pick something and stick with it. So this could be maybe malware is the classification of malware. We don't necessarily know what this is yet, although it does say calc.exe. So we can make an educated inference, but until we know exactly what we're dealing with, maybe we just call it malware. And then when we get a little bit more information, let's say it's a Trojan, we could call that Trojan. And then separated with a dot. If this is the first time that you are researching this particular specimen, it might not have a name yet. You might get to name it. That's pretty cool. And then what I like to do is keep the file extension right next to the name. And so because just from name of a malware specimen, you don't know if it's a PowerShell file or an executable or DLL. What I like to do is make sure that the original file extension is here in the file name somewhere, and then .7zip. All right, so we have our malware specimen inside of this 7-zip file. What we can do is bring this out to the desktop, and we can open this up, and inside we will have our malware specimen itself. Again, notice that there is a naming convention here. It's the same naming convention of the zipped up directory, and it is just .mals to defang the piece of malware so that you cannot inadvertently run this without meaning to. Now, the next very important part here is that if we try to copy this out to the desktop, we're going to need to enter a password. It is the standard convention in the industry to password protect and encrypt all malware specimens. And the idea is that the password is not to keep people out. The password is to make sure that the analyst that is about to copy this to their workstation, wherever that ends up being, knows very well what they're getting themselves into. And so the standard password for malware is infected, all lowercase, infected. And if you hit enter, it copies out to the desktop. And the final part here is that we want to arm our malware by removing that erroneous extension. Hitting enter, it says if you change the file extension, it will become unusable, which is ironic because that's the opposite of what we're doing. Are you sure you want to change it? Yes. And then after we have double checked our system configurations and made sure that we cannot route to our physical host and all of the other safety measures are in place, we have handled our malware from source to sink, making sure that we don't risk inadvertent infection of our host system. And that's when we get to double click the malware and run. And this one spawns calc, like it says, or does it? Well, for this one, yes, it does. It just spawns calc. But, later in the course, maybe there are others that kind of look like they're just spawning calc, but they maybe do some other kind of things. Okay, so that was the primer on safe malware handling. These procedures are to be practiced at all times during this course. So just to recap, remember, when you source malware, make sure that it has a defanged or de-armed extension appended to it. Make sure to encrypt in a password-protected zip directory all specimens, and make sure that that specimen is not brought out of the directory until it is in a safe location for detonation. And if you follow those instructions, you should be safe from inadvertent infection. And we're going to move on to the next part of this, which is talking about the sourcing of malware and how to find malware from reputable sources. So meet me in the next video and we will talk about that.